you, Walalan, miigwech. That's how you say thank you in English, Mi'kmaq, and Anishinaabe. So I'm just gonna mute my sound here. It's a little bit distracting. So Ani Bujo, Jonathan Ferrier, Anishinaabe, Nini, Indigenous, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation Treaty 19, Dojaba. So I just explained my name is Jonathan Ferrier. I'm an Indigenous, I'm an Anishinaabe person, and my heritage, Indigenous heritage, is of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in Ontario, Southern Ontario, specifically Treaty 19. We typically introduce our clan, our totem here. I'm getting closer to being confident in saying it's the Crane clan, Dodem, and you'll see why that's an issue. So hopefully this work lays some understanding to the background of our Anishinaabe pedagogy, our research methodology, how we go about working on the land, the respect that we give to it, and our way of life. And I hope this helps give some clarity to the situation in Mi'kmaq, which is where we're at. And this is Mi'kmaq. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq in Chibuktuk, which the elders explained to me is the big harbor, and other elders explained to me that is the big harbor of many spruce, and that is otherwise known as Halifax. So I'm grateful to all the lessons that I've learned from Mi'kmaq elders over the years. I grew up in Unama'ki, otherwise known as Cape Breton. And so from here, I'm inspired, of course, by two-eyed seeing. Not everybody practices two-eyed seeing, but in the academy, which is dominated by Western culture, it's hard to avoid the Western practice of science, and I'm super appreciative that we're making space for Indigenous philosophies and pedagogy and research methodologies. And the one that I'm going to dig into here is an Anishinaabe way of life and working on the land. So I like to give credit and acknowledge the different elders and nations and people that I've worked with. I've worked in Africa, Europe, Central America, all over Turtle Island. Turtle Island is otherwise known as North America. So from the left are mostly my collaborators, and going to the far right, it gets closer to family and home, to my Indigenous territory. So I was honored to walk with the Lieutenant Governor General of Ontario, with Chief up in the top right, Elder Carolyn King, top right, where we doing our Sweetwater harvest. Councillor Veronica, she is my boss for the Board of Education at Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. One of my elders is Mark Salt. He explained so much to me in our Indigenous ways of knowing and doing on the land. And then my family down the bottom right corner. Chris Tobico down in the very bottom right corner, not a family, but dear friend who's been helping me learn about my clan. And so I'm not much without these people, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation are, you know, my inspiration, and I'm very grateful for how the Michisagig, this is how we say Mississaugas in Anishinaabe Moen. Anishinaabe Moen is the language of the Anishinaabe people. Anishinaabe are sometimes known as the Ojibwe. Ojibwe really means the puckered moccasin. And the puckered moccasin was probably a way that early settlers said, well, we'd like to do business with the people with those puckered moccasins. But we called ourselves Anishinaabe. Of first man is usually how I hear it translated. So I gather a lot of inspiration from our Board of Education, the Moccasin Identifier Project by Elder Carolyn King. You'll see about that later. And Living in the Tall Grass is a book written by our chief recently. So I encourage everyone to check that out. So this is Anishinaabe Nation. Anishinaabe is basically plural for Anishinaabe. And we have our different Anishinaabe groups, nations in colors here. So the Mississaugas of Southern Ontario here is where we're focusing today. But we're also going to look at the meta-analysis that I've been doing with the different publications that we're finding online. Our creation story and oral stories tell us about a great migration where we come from Mi'kma'ki. So you can see that we were instructed by elders to go to the lakes where the good food on the water grows. So the good food, there is a literal translation for this. It's minomen. Mino means good, min means berry. So the good berry is actually known as wild rice, the good food growing on the water. So that berry is basically the instruction. Go till you find the wild rice. And as you can see from the map here, that's indeed what we did. So the dark arrows are the main stopping points, and the lighter arrows is sort of where we spread into. I think an important part of being an Indigenous professor or an Anishinaabe professor is bringing forward our pedagogy and our way of being. Now, I don't claim to be an expert in this, simply because so many of us are learning and relearning our old ways of being. We have to realize that our old ways of being was very naturally in tune with the environment. We were migrating up and down the river. It's not like we had to sit down in class every day and learn that, you know, you have to keep everything in balance and you have to respect all your relations, which are the plants, the animals, the two-legged, four-legged, the flyers, the crawlers, the swimmers. You know, this was, I think, was less strictly stated back before colonization, but now it is being more strictly stated. So Mino Bima Dizuin is the way of the good life. Mino, remember from Minomen, the wild rice, the good food on the water. Mino means good. It's really hard to translate this term, but from what I can gather, this is the simplest way, the way of the good life, and its concept of health and good living. We hope not to be ill. It's not just healing, though, it's prevention. And the big one that I take from other elders, especially Jim Dumont of the the Three Fires Medewan Lodge. He's the Grand Chief of our Grand Medicine Society, the Medewan, is living physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually well. And the big teaching that I got from Chief DeMont was that in relation to the spirit is the essence of organisms and minerals and water. Water is life. You've probably heard this. So these spirits are living. That is the energy. But it's so far from a religion. That as soon as we start talking about the spirituality being religious, we've begun to lose the point rather. So this is a picture from Miss Sagas of the Credit, Lloyd King Elementary School. And this is our creation story. So on the left, you can see that we've got us coming from nothing, that black dot up in the top left corner. This is essentially the birth of Grandmother Moon, Grandfather Sun, and the cosmos. You may have heard of the Big Bang before. This is how our creation story talks about the Big Bang. So we were lowered onto Turtle Island, North America, by Gitche Manitou. Gitche Manitou was translated as the creator by Christian missionaries. And it seems kind of like God, but that's not how we see it. It's Gitche Manitou is, Gitche means great, Manitou means spirit, basically. But the spirit is really the energy. And this energy is in the minerals, the plants, the insects, and the animals. So our survival depends on these spirits. We're totally dependent on, you know, things like metals and plants and animals for food and clothing. So these spirits live with the original instructions from Gitche Manitou. And so that's why I say that it wasn't so strictly stated, this Mino Bima Dizuin. It was just sort of our way of being. And so that with colonization, this way of life has just totally shifted. I hope this talk shows you kind of how it shifted and where it shifted to and how we're trying to realign with our living experience. And this lived experiences comes into a lot of our pedagogical philosophy, especially lifelong learning. You'll hear this concept come up quite a bit in Indigenous pedagogy. And so it's this concept of harmony and balance of the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual states that are so important in our pedagogy. So moving right along, this pedagogy goes in line with the 7 grandfather teachings, and I find it's helpful to state these 7 grandfather teachings because in a lot of ways they line up with the virtues of a lot of other cultures, like Plato and Aristotle, for instance, had their 7 virtues, and we have them too. So it's sort of a nice framework and moral philosophy that helps you achieve Mino Bima Dizuin in some regards. It's not really strictly stated. Mino Bima Dizuin is not a protocol. It's fluid and it changes. And I find that the 7 grandfather teachings really help guide us living the good life. Our sacred medicines, cedar, sage, sweetgrass, and tobacco, are part of our ceremony. And these are our 4 sacred medicines. And so our ceremony comes in with with our practice of approaching the land. And so we blend our creative knowledge while accessing our relations. And our ceremony is a heart-led thing. It's also quantitative. And I say quantitative because when we do our ceremonies, we're considering all our relations. And all our relations are all of these spirits that we're thinking about. And if we're doing a harvest of a certain spirit, we give asama. Asama is tobacco. We give tobacco to ask that spirit for permission to work with them. And so before our ceremony, before our harvest, we're actually considering, for example, when we're smudging, numbers of different beings, spirits, and it's almost doing like informing consensus. But it is pragmatic, and it is considerate, and it's highly scientific. And because we are ecological scientists, we do make observations, and we do predict things like if we clear cut a forest, we won't have a forest. And it goes much deeper than that. That seems pretty basic in Indigenous ways of knowing. Many of us are just beginning to learn that in conservation biology. And that's because, you know, like myself, when I was raised on the Mashtiki, on the beaver dam, my father taught me that these relations are sacred. Other people were taught that these relations are there to be mined or clear cut for financial purposes. And that is a major dichotomy in ways of being. So in native science, all the relationships are related to other relationships. It's circular. It's circular like the energy flowing through the planets that's spinning these cosmos into circular constructs. It's circular like the protons, electrons spinning around the atom, the nucleus. And it's this way of thinking that is truly ecological, deeply ecological and cosmological. It's not linear. The minute you go linear is the minute you begin to try to manage things. And we're not managing resources, we're respecting sources of life. It's a major dichotomy between Indigenous and Western views of thinking and conducting science. So all of this resource management stuff, it just seems a little scary. So this is shared by Indigenous peoples all over the world. And our elders would say that these actions should be led by ceremonies. But, you know, so many people want to say that, you know, our traditional ways of living are not scientific. But, you know, there's plenty of examples, even in Anishinaabe culture, where, you know, mathematics are present. We have the Wabana Society, where the people of the stars, the stargazers, are your true astrophysicists. And of course, this plays into the ecology of our land, where we migrate throughout the season. Like for the Anishinaabe, we would hunt salmon on what is called Wanskodanach in Anishinaabe Moen, place burning bright, which is otherwise known as Toronto. We had Atlantic salmon there, totally gone extinct. And we fish there until the water froze, and we go up the Credit River or the Don River into our maple syrup habitat, where we'd have our original powwow. When the Sweetwater ran, we survived the winter. But all of this is connected to the moons, just like when we call the female menstruation time, her moon time. So it's all connected to ecology, these things. And our calendars, you know, we have numbers in our language. We're counting, we're observing, we're making predictions. To say that science is not native is hogwash. In fact, if there are any turtle biologists in the room, are there any turtle biologists in the room? So on every turtle's back, you can find our calendar. You have the 13 big carapace pieces giving the 13 moons. And then on the outside, you have the 28 carapace pieces. I find there's usually 26, but having the 13 moons in the 13 carapace pieces basically governs that there will be 13 moons and 28 days between them usually. 13 times 28 is 364. And there's your calendar on every single turtle's back in the world. And it totally gives you an instruction template for living life in an ecological fashion. Whereas, you know, Western management protects 13 species and says we have to manage resources. You know, we have developed so many inventions that help us work with our observations on the land. So this is a basswood freeze dryer. So this is a lyophilizer that we would use for collecting sweet water. And when you collect sweet water, it's one of those rare times of the year when the water freezes at night and thaws during the day. So when you collect all the sweet water at night, you can remove the frozen water in the early morning, and then you're left with a concentrated solution of sugar. And this is maple syrup, of course. We had clear intellectual knowledge of our business, and now we hardly have any say in that quote business. And legal experts have spoken to me about this, and they say, well, you understand that this is racketeering, and it's still a thing that can be worked on. So it's interesting to know these things from a ethnobotanical, biological, legal perspective, what actually is happening in our indigenous nations. You know, our sacred medicines, that these are 4 of them, but then take a walk to your local drugstore, and down the bottom right corner, not sure if you can see my cursor, but you have these natural product numbers. And the natural product numbers allow different companies like Jameson, for instance, to put these products on the shelf. And if they are on the shelf without an MPN, then they're basically illegal. But to get an MPN, you either need to do a 30-year clinical trial, or have 2 sources of published information, which on Turtle Island is Indigenous knowledge. And so our safety and observations from millennia of clinical trials are owned by these corporations on Turtle Island. Surgical tools. All of these appliances were used for dermatological purposes, like horns and different metal pieces and all of these sorts of things. But even in nature, recently, this publication, down in the bottom left and bottom right corner, we have Indigenous knowledge being compared to ecology. So these people decided to cluster all of Indigenous knowledge and then compare it to ecology, which would be Western science in this case. And For the record, ecology exists within ecology exists within Indigenous knowledge. So Indigenous knowledge, according to these authors, is only qualitative, embedded in traditional laws and stories, whereas ecology is quantitative and formalized by theory. So just more colonial hogwash. So that's a little background on the state of Turtle Island pedagogy, colonization, and what the Academy sort of looks like to Indigenous people walking into it. My objectives are, for my research going forward, is to basically collect all of the published Anishinaabe ethnobotany and see what the communities use the most. And when we observe what the communities are using the most, there's a lot of research out there that says the things that are widely used by many people with consensus are typically safe and effective. And that's why they're used by numerous people from numerous communities. And so the second objective would be to work with my community, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, doing ethnobotanical surveys, and then together we would cross community observe the similarities and the differences, and then chart a way forward with different chemistry and biological assays. At this point with COVID, you know, we're basically stuck doing meta-analyses, which is quite a huge task, and we're almost done. We're getting ready to analyze some final results. Not quite there, should be another month or two before we have all the data to finally analyze, and there's probably still going to be more that we haven't laid our eyes on. But at this point, we'll go back to the community, hopefully in person, but maybe it might have to be through Zoom. And we will then, with the community, chart a way forward to investigate with bioassays and phytochemistries, the biochemistry of different foods, medicines, and materials. And I have a history of working with NMR, also some LCMS stuff to characterize these biomarkers. I'm an NMR guy. I like real phenomenon. And it allows me to do things in the past, such as like do taxonomy by chemistry, and diagnose diseases by chemistry, and look for biological actives and ecological actives by chemistry. So that's where I sort of end up. And yeah, so basically we do the cross-community consensus on different plants to be efficient with the thousands of use reports and the hundreds of plants that we could use. So basically, we would predict that plants with high cross-community consensus and high phylogenetic signal. So by these phylogenetic signals, I mean the frequencies of informant consensus, the frequencies of use of specific plants for specific symptoms. And that gets deeper with the SIV, which I'm showing here, which is the syndromic importance value. So these are disease-specific statistical methods that help you be efficient in selecting plants. Now, sometimes we have this case where you have a really knowledgeable healer that ranks something very high, which is an outlier from the consensus values. I'm aware of that and have approached those situations in the past. And in this case, it was most effective for diabetes. Diabetes is one of those syndromes that we're looking at with the MCFN. Not officially yet, because we don't have our meta-analysis and our community interviews done. So we'd like to move on in a consensus format. So the Anishinaabe here, we've been surveying the literature for use reports. And early on, we were seeing that we've got the majority medicine. That was early on while we first started looking at it. But now, as we're going deeper into things, we're seeing, like right now, I just did a quick tally of how many use reports before I presented here. And we have unknown uses at 348 use reports, but ritual, religion, magic at 57. Just a note on the religion thing. What we're doing here in this meta-analysis is we're following a standardized format for economic botany reporting. So if we didn't have a standardized format, we couldn't compare the publications that are 100, 200 years old, because they didn't follow a standardized format. So by following a standardized format, which is the Kew Botanical Gardens format for economic botany data collection, by following that format, we can compare all of the different uses. And on the right side are some of the, well, these are all the communities listed for citing ritual uses. So not religious or magic, it's mostly ritualistic ceremony. So that's how it's described in the Q Cook classification. And we have some modification to suggest for that. The syndromic importance value, like I said, it includes the weights, symptoms treated, the frequencies of citation, the total symptoms in the survey, and the total interviews in the survey. So ethnobotany is not a listing practice, it's scientific. And I thought it was important to show that. So this is the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation territorial homeland. The blue here is, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the blue kind of in the middle, just to the left of Toronto, above the, between the lakes purchase, that's Treaty 19. That's my family's homeland. And what we've been doing is we've been mapping the different plants and such that I've been encountering in Treaty 19 area and around the nation. And it's helpful for determining the roles of our clans. And the people within these clans have very specific roles that were, passed on through the expertise within the clan. So these clans are, they help, they are a traditional form of governance, first of all. And these clans have certain roles. And those clans used to lead the nation before it was chief and council leading the nation. So this was one thing that was lost during colonization. So when Canada came about, it constructed this chief and council system on the reserve. And now reserves are called First Nations. And this is, I believe it's a deliberate attempt to remove our countries from international dialogue, because these are countries. These are nations that were governed by a traditional clan system, and it's just different. So while we're on reserves and being called First Nations, which is basically uh, 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 the model that Canada used for taking our land, uh, this is removing us from the international dialogue. So it's important to get this back, because we are going to be self-governing again, and we will need our standard practices of governance for working with all our relations. So what I do a lot of work on is the trails that led us through our seasonal migrations, and the camps that we find in the literature, in the museums, are so valuable. And this is another reason why our elders are super sacred to us, and why COVID was so scary for us, because they hold this knowledge, and there's not a lot of elders that know this stuff. And you know, connecting to our relations and these trails and these camps, and then these meta-analyses, you know, and finding consensus within our community on these meta-analyses, and then finding uniqueness within our community. This puts our nation back on the map. And that's literally what is happening here in my research. I've worked with Indigenous people all over the world, and it's saddening and totally shocking to basically dedicate this much time to background. I've never had to root through and piece back together such an insidiously destructive thing that happened to our people. You know, I got a firm belief that I have to be positive about this stuff, but I think the audience needs to know how the toll that our people have taken. And so mapping this stuff is super important. And what we map are the relations, and what our relations names are is our way of speaking our language. And so speaking our language is our education, because it's how we speak to our relations. It's how we conduct ceremonies. So every animal and plant has a name that is inspired by the environment. So that's why when you hear about our language in science, people are like, well, that's so artistic and so social sciences. No, it's ecological. And some people just don't get it. So at this point, this is one of the most the most developed map that we have at this point, to my knowledge. This is done by Donald Smith in his book, Sacred Feathers. And it describes a lot of the ways, the ways of the Michisagig of the credit. And so you can see the Credit River here on the left, the Trufton Creek, the Missinaihi. It's the Credit. We got the name the Credit River because we basically achieved good credit with the settlers. So we would come down the river, and one of our cousins would say, look, I need a pot, I need a pan, I've got no furs, I've got no skins, but maybe you can give me a pan and I'll go back home. And the way we achieve credit is by the next person who came down the river would always pay the debt of their cousin who came before them, always. And that's how we got the name Mississaugas of the Credit. And that's how the river got its name, the Credit River. So Wascotanach Burning Bright Point, for example, I decided to put this one up because this is comes from where we would basically torch, we would fish by torch, and the place was burning bright, and the forest had a lot of burning going on because we used so many torches to basically torch our salmon. A lot of people here would call that poaching, but for us it was a way of life, and it shouldn't be shamed that we use light to collect fish. And our spear points are all over the place. Was Waywin spearing a fish at the light of a torch? You can see that this way of life is not poaching. We have a term for it, for collecting our food. So this spearhead was recently brought to us, and so we're writing protocols to bring it back to the reserve instead of in a museum away from our community. Anit, a spear. This is from Chris Tobico. So we're finding these all over these red dot places. So these are our ArcGIS maps, and you can see that the red dots are coming through, and in blue here is the Credit River on the north side and the Grand River on the south side. Here is Hamilton. Hamilton, this red dot, it's the traditional name translates place where a small kind of turtle lays its eggs. So what we filled in here is all the places where this book gave sites for wigwam camps. So you can see here that we're knowing stuff very well along the shores where we do our fishing. So this is where our summer to fall camps would be, okay? Then we would move up the river. What happened next is that the Jones baseline was carved out, and the Jones baseline is important, as you can see, for Treaty 19, okay? So I get a lot of treaty education from Darren King. His mother was a chief at MCFN, and Donald Smith, who I've mentioned previously, was the historian that wrote Sacred Feathers and Portraits of the Mississaugas to talk about our relatives and family. The Jones baseline, it's 1792, Upper Canada, John Simcoe. It runs from Burlington to Arthur. It separates the government land west and the Mississaugas east. And it's also the boundary of Eramosa Township, which is where my family is. That's our wintering ground, and it's the last known place where my family was living a traditional life. The upper portion of the grant was sold by Six Nations. So Six Nations are not Anishinaabe, they are Haudenosaunee. Otherwise, the Haudenosaunee are known as the Iroquois, and their traditional border boundary is Niagara Falls, which is our traditional boundary, except theirs is east and ours is west of Niagara Falls. But with the British, they acquired 6 miles on either side of the Grand, and the Grand River is indeed the Grand River. Mississaugas means people of the great rivers, and this is the greatest river in our territory. Yeah, interesting. So I have to go to my elders on understanding this stuff quite a bit, because it was land that was sold, and it's land that impacted the fate of my family, which I'm learning about all the time. So this upper portion of the Haldeman tract was sold by Six Nations in blocks. But now we're seeing that this land is being extended as people interpret the river systems in different ways. And so it leaves me kind of clueless sometimes how to approach this. But here we are in Eramosa Township, between the Grand River and the Missinaihi, the Credit River. And in my research at the different museums, more of this background research, which is so important to understanding the ecology. It really is. I can't stress it enough, because it connects to our clan systems and our migrations. And our migrations is purely ecological and seasonal, which is all on the turtle's back. So this Bonaccord place happens to have a lot of information written about the natives, the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe people, the Mississauga people, my family and cousins in this area. So this place disenfranchised their own women. It's a settler colonial place. And it enfranchised those who owned a minimum of 10 pounds worth of property. So any property that you had, you became part of this Bonaccord. Non-property owners were deemed unworthy to be trusted with the vote. That's how things work. So some of this Bonaccord stuff is super important because the people would talk about, oh, look who's coming into our area. They have these migration camps with a continued historic use. And it's in this Fergus, Elora, Salem. So that's basically on each side of the Grand River, moving towards the Credit River. Lover's Leap, the Elora juncture was popular, and many migratory wigwam camps. The important thing about this is that these are migratory camps. The Anishinaabe were migratory people. The Haudenosaunee, which who are the Holdeman Tract people, are not migratory. They stay in one place. So we're all called Indians, but it's important to know that we were migrating because that tells us that these are Anishinaabe people living a traditional life here. Some large wigwams. So the wigwams are Anishinaabe. Haudenosaunee are longhouses. And so this is so important to understanding the history of my family and who I am as an Indigenous person on Turtle Island. So they were covered with cedar and hemlock, and they're talking about our trails coming through these creeks. So our elders would tell us that we lived, you know, just always within a few hundred feet of these creeks. So Gidjaganduk, this is the white cedar. It's one of our most sacred trees. It is our sacred tree. It's our sacred tree of life. I have it weaved into the back of my hand drum, and it's used for so many things, of course, on our wigwams, but incredible antiviral medicine that comes up quite a lot in our discussions around COVID. And it means a sky, or basically I understand it as sky tree. So it's our tree of life. And Gagagimic is our hemlock tree, and these are found in this area. So it's amazing how densely populated the northern headwaters of the Grand and the Credit River are with these trees. And so these were major materials for our wigwams, and of course served a number of food and medicine purposes. So up in the top left, you can see that we're discovering our trails and we're entering them here. And you can see that with each of these wigwam sites, each of these sites that are appearing here, I'm just popping them up one by one, it's all connected to a published piece of information. This wigwam art that I've drawn up myself is basically the standard for, it's a camp and our Anishinaabe camps are filled with wigwams, and they're seasonal. So these are Indian trails and sites that the locals spoke about, and each one has a site location, so it enables us to put a wigwam on the map and understand where we were living and what we were doing. Now, this is super important to find these trails, because Carolyn King, Elder King, former chief of the Mississaugas of the Credit, she has a moccasin identifier project. And so this project goes to put all of these moccasins on the ground. You can paint them, and we're trying to make them digital. And you should check out our site called themoccasinidentifier.com. If we as First Nations people do not get a marker on the ground today, we will be forever lost tomorrow. And that's Carolyn King's project. And it's really a wonderful thing that we should give a mention to here. So next in this area, it's well known that Chief Jones, one of our chiefs here, was mentioned by Ferrier here, which was one of the first clerks, government clerks in the newly acquired territory in Treaty 19. And the most important thing is Ferrier saying, you know, they were led by Chief Jones, and he's saying they're appearing in the back of my farm here, and they're asking for turnips. They don't have much in the way of cookery and stuff, but they like my turnips. And I say, why don't you just kill some wolves? And well, we say, we don't care to kill the wolves because the wolves hunt like us. And that's an ecological clue, because the wolves show us where to hunt deer. And that was super important for all our tools, our hunting implements. And so Mangan wolf is well noted here. They're killing all of the livestock on the farms, and it's noted that it's Jones here. But actually, when you come to our historians, they say, no, this is Chief Mangwadas. This is his territory. And I brought up this with my nation, and this is our newsletter that goes out. And so we're just talking about how this new stuff is coming to light. And this area is known as Eramosa. And so it's Eramosa Township, and it was previously the hunting grounds of our people. And Treaty 19 included Eramosa Township, and the name Eramosa came into existence in the summer of 1819. It's believed to come from the Indian word unamosa, meaning dog. And that's a quote from Chapel, but there's other references that I have that state black dog, dead dog. So this is the land of the dog. But it's actually, these dogs are basically getting, the wolves are getting the name dog in this area. And unamosa comes from the word animosh, which is dog. So this is actually singular when I say animosh. But when you say Eramosa, that a lets you know that it's plural, like the Anishinaabe, Animoshag, that ag, ek, that's a plural, and it's deliberate here. So we understand that it's many dogs, it's packs of dogs, it's many wolves. This is land of the wolves. And the wolves, as you've just seen in that other note by Ferrier, is so important for us connecting with our food source, the deer, which are just north. So we would follow the wolves' lead to get our deer. And this is my family's neighborhood. So what we're doing with some of my students while we're collecting plants locally, waiting for COVID to pass, is we looked at some of the other items that we found in our museum literature review, and we're finding out that there are burial mounds, and this is the woodlot on the northwest corner of the farm is where you'll find our people buried. And so here we had the Mitigwaki, the forest, and here you can see that there's no clear cut. But sadly, we see that this land went up for sale and they clear cut this. And this is where our burial mounds are. And I'm not very good at saying this word. Chibegamic is the house of the dead. So that's how we call our burial mounds. And so what Sangwa is doing is she's using the LiDAR mapping to present these burial mounds, and we're starting to model them. So we're trying to build polygons around these hillshade figures, and we're getting used to working with the data, and we're trying to build models. So you can see that like the rivers, we're burying our dead right on the rivers, these little streams and such in here. So these are, you know, my great ancestors in here. But it's all on private property and we have no way to access it, except for by LiDAR and mapping. So we're working really hard to predict where more of these burial mounds are by creating these polygon figures and getting around to finding more places, and more places with these burial mounds are going to give us clues of where our camps are. So they indicate prominent seasonal locations, and the next would be to make a deep learning model of these. And that's why these maps are so important. More of these Bibonishuan wintering grounds are coming up from the literature. So in my backyard again here, Rockwood, we're still migrating right up to 1884. So these are the people, Wabakanine, further back, George Henry, which is closer, and this is my great-grandmother on the far right side. And these people belong to the Crane clan. Chris Tobico brought this clan identity to me, and he said, look, these are the earth that's not well known from your territory, and this is the crane foot. And you can see the crane foot under here, and some people are telling me that the X and Y around on each side of the crane foot says that this was done past or post contact, so post colonization. And this is the canoe. This is a famous glyph for canoes in the Anishinaabe territory. And so you have moose here, bear, you have the serpents here, and maybe the giant here. I'm not a glyph expert, but this is all in our territory here in Treaty 19. So just today I discovered that our treaty was not signed by any people of the Crane clan. And Toronto has a history of a problem with this, where signatures were forged, and Toronto was proven stolen by forging signatures. And so I just realized this morning that, whoa, Crane clan is not on our treaty. What do you know? So yeah, this is where my family ended up, and my grandfather and his sister, they have stories that say, you know, we came from the north, and these are consensus statements from different members of my family. And so this is where our Mississauga nations are. And so Mississauga's on of the credit down south, and going further north, we have the other Mississauga nations. And so this is that sacred territory. You can see the big white pines. You can see all of the cedar trees on that gypsum that, you know, makes a great palette for the different petroglyphs that I was showing. Unfortunately, my family was found to end up on these farms, and these farms were given to the first settlers of the area by the Crown. And so we have all of this documentation to see how these people benefited from the land. And this benefit came through the acquisition of 50-acre plots. So it was, you basically got 100 acres and 100 acres. And then if you clear cut everything, you got another 50 acres. And so that was the last 50-acre piece there on the far right in yellow. And we have it all documented here to see how it was acquired from the Crown. So this played right into the Colonial Road program. And so this is where the Indian Act starts to take a real stronghold in the narrative here. So this is after Canada. So everything here is Canada impacting my community, my family. So basically 200 acres, 100 was for farm, another 100 was for the road. The rule was that you had to clear cut everything. And if that was satisfied, you got another 50 acres for a nominal thing such as $1 or a cent. So this made for the greatest sawmill density from Canada in MCFN territory. So there are the 250 acres. So this is the sawmill in Animosh, in Aramosa, and this is Aramosa. Those are the 4 farms, and the real name of this place is Animoshek. It's land of the wolves. And unfortunately, those farms is where we get my family's acknowledged case of slavery. So this is where my great-great-grandmother was a slave and documented by Canada here. She was also sent to a school. I looked for her in the mush hole, can't find her. She was probably put in one of the first residential schools that was later closed. And then everybody else was sent off to the mush hole. So, you know, you've got public works here. Now you've got this aspect, this ministry of the government taking, you know, the census. You've got the Ministry of Education sending people to residential schools. You've got the Ministry of Agriculture doing indentured servitude, which is understood as slavery, checked it out with historians. So this is why Canada wants to get rid of the Indian Act, is because it incriminates them on every ministerial level. And so one of the few cases of slavery here, you know, I shouldn't be giving this talk right now. I was supposed to be completely assimilated, not knowing this. And these are the 3 decades of photos that you can find of this family from those farm places. And the big question is, why are these children missing from the family portraits? Because they're not their children, they're slaves. You could probably, if you had really good technology, you might be able to see a body behind that fence in the field. But this is how Canada and these different areas of the provinces benefited from land that was quite often stolen. And then once they stole the land, they're actually enslaving Indigenous people and Black people. So this is my great grandmother, and she was actually born in captivity. And they took our native name and they made us Simons from and this is the owner of the firm. His last name was Simons. And they marked us as illegitimate people. So she's born in captivity before July 1st, 1867, which is important because if it's before, sorry, so this is after, that's a typo. So it's after 1867, which is important to know because if it's before, then you're not a status Indian. So my family is status Indians in Canada and is protected by Bill C-31 and Bill C-3 amendments. And here we are still migrating in the area, being swallowed up by Canada. And thank you, Chris Tobico, for showing us our clan insignia here and helping us figure it out. And this is the Gradual Civilization Act from Canada. This is what they wanted to happen. It was called enfranchisement, and it would aggressively assimilate Aboriginal populations. So this is government mandate. And then the report on Native education, which was led by the Baga Commission and Egerton Ryerson, which is Ryerson University. He created U of T. He created the Ministry of Agriculture just north of Guelph. And this is where all of this is happening. This is where all of the Indian Act was created, right in our territory. And so it's why our people went down to about 50 people left of our tribe. And this is the first landowners map. These are all of the campsites that we're finding, and our trail sites are here. It's coming alive. It's our nation coming alive, and it feels really good. But at the same time, it hurts, and it's tough to talk about. I try to do it respectably. I don't blame people for not being educated on this stuff. It's not how Canada could make money. Canada started as a corporation, and it still functions as a corporation, and you can see that in Mi'kma'ki with the recent fisheries stuff. And so this is genocide by clear cutting and salmon extinction. It's just like the buffalo, just like the husky dogs of the north. And here it's genocide by sawmills and salmon. So this is a note to the government saying, look, you're taking all our salmon, you're just netting them off. We can't get any. You said our land was unceded on the riverbanks of the rivers, but we can't even use the rivers because people at the mouth of the river are collecting all the salmon. And that's how the salmon went extinct in our territory, almost like the buffalo. Yeah, so we're putting together these maps, and what happens when you're put through this? Well, the only way you survive is by fighting. And so my grandfather became a championship fighter in Toronto, but they still wouldn't give us a home. And so my dad on the right is here seen being raised in a pig pen on a farm because my grandparents actually had no place to put my dad. And you can see that he's scabbed by the sun. So my grandfather, when he came to get him, took this picture that, this is the situation that Indigenous people go through. This is my dad, raised in a pig pen and scorched by the sun. You can see the scabs all over his head. But we return to the land. It's our medicine. And we're learning all of these medicines and ways of life back on the reserve with our fall harvest. Mama Wind teaches us the old ways where we're, curing our furs, preparing bear fat here. Here I am with Elder Sue, salt, different, lying corn, smoking meat, hanging out with the elders, making fish, making our weirs, our salmon, torching salmon, George here, he makes all of these hooks, and he spears his own salmon. This is me dancing wild rice, Minoman. I was taught this by Elder Salt. And this is, we're toasting the wild rice here. You can see it just goes like that over the fire. And then you dance it, and then the husk comes off a little easier. And you can see the husk, it goes up in the wind. And this is called winnowing wild rice. And the wind takes it away. And that's how we winnow wild rice. Yeah, so getting back to these things is how we take back our culture. The clan system, of course, would give us all of these sorts of duties. And it's so important. This is us, collecting sweet water, making maple syrup. You see the technology behind it, the old ways of doing it. So much of that is gone now, but we're waking it up. The one last thing that I'm going to mention, I know I've gone a little longer than usual probably, but Pawpaw was one of the first things that we started doing in my short time here. Everybody in the community was super excited when I said, we've got one of these plants called the Pawpaw. And the pawpaw is the largest fruit of Turtle Island, and it's good for cancer. Well, everybody went wild, and now pawpaw, just in the last year, is having this huge resurgence. Everybody is planting it on the reserve now. So this stuff is super meaningful to us. So we collected from 3 trees over the season to sort of show a seasonal variation of the plant, and we're using NMR to do that over at NRC. And here we've got annonacin. This is one of the cancer metabolites that are quite active in anti-cancer. We use the leaves here. We did a quick seasonal study with my first honor student of my career, and we didn't find annonacin in the leaves. I was hoping to find it in the leaves so we wouldn't have to use a little harder to get plant parts such as the seeds or the roots. So if we found it in the leaves, that would have been really cool, and we could have tested it in a bioassay. But there's a reason why the elders and the ancestors said use the fruit and the other parts of the tree, is because that works. And the annonacin was not in the leaves. So there's your hint. Listen to your elders. I listen to the Board of Education, who I work with and who I'm totally inspired by. And if you can help me develop my work plan, I'd be super grateful. Everything comes back to the land, and these teachings and everything is super important to us. And I'm very grateful for your attention and the different ideas that you may have. And thanks for creating this space. It means everything to us. Here in Mi'kma'ki, it's not an Anishinaabe country, but we are related. There's a prophecy that says we'll come back together again to reunite our bundles. The Anishinaabe hold the medicine bundles that were sent into protection by the Mi'kmaq while we migrated west to find the good food on the water. So many Mi'kmaq elders have called me up and said, do you know you're fulfilling a prophecy? I said, yes, my elders on the credit told me this. So here we are, bridging those national relations, and Dalhousie has helped out in a great way. They've helped us put the outdoor learning class with the talking circle. We have space for sacred fire. We have the big map of Mi'kma'ki with all of the place names coming alive in a food and medicine garden. It's beautiful. Chimigwech, Walaleo, thank you very, very much. It's quite an honor to do this work, and we wouldn't have it done if it wasn't for our community here. Chimigwech.